A 16-year-old girl vanishes without a trace. No warning. No goodbye. Just gone. And at first, it looks like she may have run away. But the deeper investigators dig, the darker the story becomes. Because this isn't just about a missing teenager. It's about secrets, betrayal, and someone hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Mind of Murders. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because on this channel, we break down real cases, real motives, and the psychology behind them. Now let's get into today's case. December 19, 2018 started like any normal morning in Jacksonville, Florida. 16-year-old Ayanna Sawyer got ready for school just like she always did. She was a sophomore at Terry Parker High School, a straight-A student with big dreams, the kind of girl teachers admired, the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. She lived with her family, including her younger sister, and the two were close. They usually moved together, especially when it came to school routines. So when her younger sister got on the school bus that morning, and Ayanna didn't, something immediately felt wrong. It wasn't like her. Not even close. Her sister noticed at first. Confused, she tried to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. So she did the only thing she could do. She called her mom. At the time, Ayanna's mother, Kimberly, was at work. And from the moment she got that call, panic set in. Because she knew her daughter. And she knew this wasn't normal. Within minutes, the family jumped into action. Calls were made. Relatives were contacted. And soon enough, 911 was on the line. What started as confusion quickly turned into chaos. Because no one knew where Ayanna was. And no one had seen her leave. It was like she had disappeared into thin air. Meanwhile, at the school, something else came to light. Surveillance footage showed that Ayanna had actually been there earlier that day. But around 11 a.m., she left campus, walking out with 2 bags. One looked normal. School books, notebooks, the usual. But the second bag, that one stood out. It was packed with personal items, including a large amount of Victoria's Secret clothing and even a body pillow. That wasn't something you carry unless you're planning something. And suddenly, a new theory started to form. Maybe she left on purpose. Police initially believed she had run away. There were no signs of force, no struggle, no witnesses reporting anything suspicious, just a quiet exit. But that theory didn't sit right with her family. Because Ayanna wasn't the type to just disappear. She was close to her mom, loyal to her family, focused on her future. And there was something else. Something very few people knew at the time. Ayanna was pregnant. 5 months pregnant. It was a secret she had only recently shared with her mother. And despite the shock, her family had chosen to support her. They had even named the unborn baby Hazel Michelle. So now the situation became even more serious. A missing teenager was one thing, but a pregnant teenager, that changed everything. Still, days passed with no sign of her. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. And after 2 days of searching, police made a decision. This was no longer a runaway case. Ayanna Sawyer was officially listed as a missing person. And that's when her mother made a discovery. Something hidden deep inside Ayanna's laptop. A discovery that would change the entire direction of the case. As the days passed with no sign of Ayanna, her mother couldn't just sit still and wait. She needed answers. So she did what any desperate parent would do. She started going through her daughter's things. Her room, her bags, anything that might explain where she went. And then she opened Ayanna's laptop. At first, nothing unusual. But deep inside, in a place most people wouldn't even think to check, the recycle bin, she found something. Document. Deleted. Hidden. But not gone. When she opened it, everything changed. It wasn't just random notes. It was personal. Very personal. Page after page, Ayanna was pouring her heart out, writing about someone named Jose. She talked about love, obsession, confusion, and betrayal. It was emotional, intense, and honestly a little disturbing. Because whoever Jose was, he clearly meant a lot to her. But here's the thing. Her mother had never heard that name before. Not once. No mention. No introduction. Nothing. So now the question was simple. Who is Jose? And could he have something to do with her disappearance? When investigators looked closer, they noticed something else. The entries were dated months earlier. Early 2018. Around the same time, Ayanna had been involved in a situation her family already knew about. A situation that had caused serious concern. There was a man who lived nearby. His name was Kamar Humphrey, and at the time, he had been in a sexual relationship with Ayanna. She was only 15. He was an adult. It was illegal. And when her mother found out, she pushed for a full investigation. DNA was collected, and Kamar admitted to the relationship. He was even registered as a sex offender because of it. So naturally, when Ayanna went missing, he became one of the first people police looked at. But there was a problem. The timeline didn't match. Based on the pregnancy, he likely wasn't the father. And when police checked his alibi for the day she disappeared, it held up. He was out of town, which meant he couldn't have taken her. So investigators were back to square one. But that name, Jose, it didn't go away. Because whoever he was, he clearly had a deep connection to Ayanna. And now he might be the key to everything. The breakthrough didn't come from police. It came from inside the family. At some point, Ayanna's mother decided to ask her younger sister directly. No assumptions. No pressure. Just one simple question. Who is Jose? And that's when everything shifted. Because the answer wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some secret boyfriend from school. It was someone they already knew. Someone close. Very close. Her sister said, Jose is Uncle John. Uncle John. Real name, Jonathan Quills. And just like that, the entire case took a dark turn. Because Jonathan wasn't just some distant relative. He was part of their everyday life. Ayanna and her siblings spent time at his house. Sleepovers, weekends, summers. He and his wife helped take care of the kids. He was trusted, respected. The kind of person no one would ever suspect. At least, not at first. When police approached Jonathan, his reaction seemed normal, calm, cooperative, even helpful. He didn't panic. He didn't get defensive. If anything, he welcomed them, told them to search his house, offered them food, acted like he had nothing to hide. And his wife stood right beside him, defending him, saying there was no way he could be involved. But then, something strange happened. During the conversation, the topic of Ayanna's missing belongings came up. And that's when Jonathan said something. That didn't sit right. He mentioned, very specifically, that Ayanna had taken 38 pairs of Victoria's Secret underwear when she left. Not some clothes, not a bag of things. He gave a number. A very specific number. And for investigators, that raised a serious red flag. Because how would he know that? Why would he know that? It was too detailed, too personal. And suddenly, his calm behavior didn't feel reassuring anymore. It felt calculated. Then there was something else. Police learned that Ayanna's mother had already been uncomfortable with how close Jonathan was to her daughter. So much so that she had told her kids to cut off contact with him, block him, stay away. And now with a diary, with a name, Jose, with the strange comments, everything started lining up in a way no one wanted to believe. So investigators brought Jonathan in for questioning. And as expected, he denied everything. Said he had no idea where Ayanna was. No involvement. Nothing. But by this point, he was no longer just a concerned family member. He was now a person of interest, and what police would discover next would push this case from a missing person to something far more disturbing. At this point, investigators had suspicions, but they still needed proof. Jonathan Quills had been questioned, his house searched, and his behavior noted, but nothing concrete had tied him directly to Ayanna's disappearance until the DNA results came back. See, months earlier, when Ayanna had that case involving the neighbor, a sexual assault kit had been processed, and in that evidence, there was more than one DNA profile. At the time, it didn't mean much, but now, with Jonathan on the radar, detectives decided to revisit it. They rushed his DNA for testing, and when the results came in, it changed everything. Jonathan Quill's DNA was found on Ayanna's underwear. Not a partial match, not something unclear. Direct hit. And just like that, the story he had been telling started to fall apart. Because now it wasn't just suspicion anymore. There was physical evidence placing him in a deeply inappropriate relationship with his own niece. And that raised an even bigger question. Was he the father of her unborn child? Investigators couldn't confirm that just yet, but the possibility alone was enough to shift the entire case. Now they weren't just looking at a missing person. They were looking at sexual abuse, and possibly something much worse. But as shocking as the DNA was, it wasn't the only thing about to come to light. Because just when detectives were processing this, a phone call came in, and this call would take the case to a whole different level. The call came from someone who knew Jonathan better than almost anyone else. His own brother, Joseph Quills. And from the moment he started talking, detectives knew this wasn't just another tip. This was different. According to Joseph, Jonathan had called him around the time Ayanna disappeared, and he didn't sound normal. He sounded panicked, nervous, like something had gone terribly wrong. At first, Joseph didn't take it seriously. He thought maybe his brother was exaggerating or just talking out of stress. But then, Jonathan said something that stuck. He told him that a girl might be pregnant and that the baby might be his. And then came the part Joseph couldn't ignore. Jonathan said he might have to get rid of the body. At that point, it stopped sounding like confusion. It sounded like a confession. According to Joseph, the call ended suddenly. But later, Jonathan called back again. And this time, he was calm, too calm, like whatever problem he had was already handled. When Joseph pressed him for answers, Jonathan allegedly went into detail. He said he had lured Ayanna to his workplace, an area with no cameras, no witnesses. He first tried to strangle her, but couldn't go through with it. So instead, he shot her, then placed her body in a dumpster. And just like that, he believed it was over. His life wouldn't be ruined. No one would find out. Now, hearing something like that about your own brother, it's not easy to accept. And Joseph didn't want to believe it. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore it either. Because if it was true, and he stayed silent, he would have to live with that forever. So he made a decision. He called the police and told them everything. That call changed the direction of the investigation overnight. Because now detectives didn't just have DNA. They had a potential confession. And it came from someone on the inside. But even with all that, there was still one problem. They didn't have a body. No crime scene. No physical proof that a murder had actually happened. So the question now was, could they prove it? Or was this case about to become one of those rare situations where everything points to the truth, but nothing can fully confirm it? After the call from Jonathan's brother, detectives knew they had to move carefully. They had strong suspicion. They had DNA. They had a detailed statement. But they still needed something more solid, something they could put in front of a jury. So they brought Jonathan in again. And just like before, he stayed consistent, calm, controlled, denying everything. No breakdown, no confession. If anything, he leaned into it. "I'm not a monster," he said. "I had nothing to do with her disappearance." At that point, investigators realized they weren't going to get anything out of him directly. So they changed strategy. Instead of pushing harder, they stepped back and decided to listen instead. Inside the jail, they worked with another inmate, someone who could get close to Jonathan, talk to him, gain his trust. The plan was simple. Let Jonathan talk freely, without realizing he was being recorded. And it worked. Because once he started talking, he didn't stop. At first, it sounded like casual conversation. But slowly, he began to open up. He talked about the pregnancy, about how everything was about to fall apart, how his life, his family, everything he built was at risk. And then he started describing what happened. Not in a dramatic way, not emotional, just matter of fact. He said he tried to choke her first, but couldn't go through with it. So he pulled out a gun and shot her. Just like that. Then he explained what he did next. He dumped her body in a dumpster, covered it, and moved on, like it was a problem he had solved. Listening to it, there was no panic in his voice, no regret, just someone explaining a decision he had already made peace with. For investigators, this was huge, because now they weren't relying on secondhand information. They had his own words, his own voice, describing the crime. But even then, there was still one major problem. Everything he said needed to be backed up, because without physical evidence, the defense could still argue it was all talk. So detectives went back to the timeline, back to the locations, back to every detail he mentioned. And that's when they focused on one place in particular, his workplace. Jonathan had told two different people the same thing, his brother and the inmate. He said it happened at work, an auto salvage yard, a place with noise, heavy equipment, and areas not covered by cameras. So detectives pulled the surveillance footage from that day, December 19th, the day Ayanna disappeared. And what they found was interesting. Jonathan did leave work around the time Ayanna went missing. That much was confirmed. But there was no clear footage showing him picking her up, no direct moment tying the two together. And that gave him a small window of doubt, because he also had an explanation. He said he left to pick up parts, a normal work errand. And technically, that checked out. So now investigators had a theory, but no clear visual proof. Still, they believed his story about what happened inside the yard. He mentioned an area without cameras, a restricted spot. If that's where it happened, then there wouldn't be any footage anyway. So they moved to the next part of his statement. The dumpster. According to him, that's where he put her body. And from there, it would have been taken to a landfill. So detectives tracked it. They found the company that collected the dumpster, followed the route, and it led them to a landfill on Otis Road. And this is where things got extreme. Because once they got there, they didn't just take a quick look. They launched a full-scale search. 4 weeks. Heavy machinery. Teams digging through layers of trash, some of it buried over 80 feet deep. The cost alone ran into millions, all for one goal: to find Ayanna, or anything connected to her. Clothing, personal items, anything. And after all that work, they found almost nothing. A few pieces of clothing that might have belonged to her, but nothing definitive. No body, no clear physical link. And just like that, they were back in a difficult position. Because despite everything, the DNA, the statements, the recorded confession, they still didn't have the one thing most cases rely on: body. And without it, the defense would have an opening. Because now the question wasn't just, did he do it? It became, can you prove it beyond reasonable doubt? It took years before the case finally made it to trial. Nearly 5 years after Ayanna disappeared, Jonathan Quills stood in court, facing the charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of sexual battery. He pleaded not guilty. From the start, Both sides knew this wouldn't be a straightforward case, because while the story was strong, the physical evidence was not. No body, no confirmed murder weapon tied to the crime, no direct video showing what happened. And that gave the defense something to work with. Their argument was simple. You can't prove a murder without a body. You can't confirm how she died. And you can't say with certainty that Jonathan Quills is responsible. They leaned heavily on that doubt. But the prosecution came in with a different strategy. If they couldn't show the crime directly, they would build it piece by piece, using everything else. And they had a lot. They brought in Ayanna's family, people who knew her, people who could speak on her character, her relationship with Jonathan, and how things had changed over time. Then came one of the most important witnesses, Jonathan's own wife at the time. She admitted something that shifted the room. At first, she had defended him. She didn't believe he could do anything like this. But then she saw messages, conversations between Jonathan and Ayanna. And once she saw them, her perspective changed, because those messages weren't innocent. Some were inappropriate, some were controlling, and some were outright disturbing. At one point, he told her he was so in love with her. Another message carried a tone that felt almost threatening. That was no longer a normal family relationship. And the jury could see that. Then came the testimony that hit even harder. Jonathan's brother. The same brother who made that call to police. He took the stand and repeated everything Jonathan had told him. The panic, the confession, the details about the killing. And you could feel the weight of it. Because this wasn't speculation. This was someone sitting in court, talking about what his own brother admitted. Not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. And then, the prosecution played the recording. The jailhouse conversation. Jonathan's own voice, calmly describing what he did, how he tried to choke her, how he shot her, how he disposed of the body. There was no confusion in his words, no hesitation, just a clear sequence of actions. And as that audio played, people in the courtroom paid attention, especially the jury, because at that moment, they weren't hearing a theory, they were hearing him. By the time both sides rested, the case came down to one thing: belief. Did the jury believe the story the prosecution had built? Or did the doubt raised by the defense hold enough weight? Because on paper, it wasn't a perfect case. There were gaps, missing pieces, and of course, no body. But there was also something else. Consistency. The same story, told in different ways, at different times, to his brother, to another inmate, and backed by DNA, backed by messages, backed by behavior that didn't quite add up. So when the jury went in to deliberate, they had a lot to think about. And when they came back, their decision was clear. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder for Ayanna. First-degree murder for her unborn child. And sexual battery. In that moment, after years of waiting, the case finally had an answer. But it didn't end there, because the next decision was just as serious. What should his punishment be? The death penalty was on the table. The prosecution pushed for it. They argued the nature of the crime, the betrayal, the loss of 2 lives, demanded the highest consequence. But the defense asked for something different. They didn't try to deny what happened. Instead, they focused on one thing: his life. They brought in people who knew him, a psychologist, family members, trying to show that despite everything, there was still something worth saving. So once again, the jury had to decide, and this time, they chose life. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. No release, no second chance, just the rest of his life behind bars. And with that, the case was over, at least in the eyes of the law. But for Ayanna's family, that kind of closure is never complete, because no verdict, no sentence, can bring her back or the child she never got to meet. In the end, justice was served, but it didn't come with peace, because Ayanna Sawyer never came home. Her body was never found. No proper goodbye. No closure in the way a family truly needs it. She was just 16, full of plans, full of life, and carrying a child who never got the chance to be born. 2 lives, taken in the worst possible way. And what makes this case even harder to process is who was responsible. Not a stranger, not someone lurking in the shadows, but someone she trusted. Someone who was already inside her world. Cases like this remind you of something uncomfortable. That danger doesn't always come from far away. Sometimes it's much closer than we think. If you made it this far, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the evidence was enough without a body? Or do you believe there are still unanswered questions? And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mind of Murderers for more real cases like this. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe.